Hi, I'm David Domke. I'm chair of the Department of Communication at the University of Washington. I'm a professor here, and every once in a while I like to do conversations with some of our faculty or staff that are doing interesting, compelling things or have a body of expertise that I would like to just kind of learn more about. Today I'm joined by a colleague of mine, Professor Gerry Philipsen. Gerry is retiring here at the University of Washington after 35 years of excellence in the Department of Communication and in communication studies generally. And I just wanted to talk with him a little bit about his experiences, some of the pieces that he's learned over the years, just as a chance to get a little bit more knowledge about a colleague of mine. Thanks, Gerry.
Thank you, David.
So 35 years ago you came to the University of Washington. What brought you here?
Well, I was attracted by two things. One is that I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Portland and had felt that after some years in other places, Colorado, Illinois, California, that I wanted to come home, as it were, and so I got the opportunity to come to the University of Washington. I was also drawn to this as a great university and had followed its fortunes, and so I felt that I got two nice things to come here. One is a wonderful city and region, and another is a great university where I've been very happy to serve for 35 years now.
What made you want to study communication, and why have you studied it all this time? What's the fascinating bit about it for you?
Well, that's changed over the years. I first started studying communication, I would say, as a debater in college, high school and college. And that was a kind of communication that was really intense and sort of hammer and tongs kind of life. And I enjoyed that thoroughly. By the time it was time for me to find a career, I was thinking about law school and some other things, but the idea of studying human communication presented itself. And this struck me as a fascinating area of study that harked back in some ways to my career, you might say, as a debater and public speaker, but that as it was being developed when I went to graduate school in 1967, the study of communication opened up many other lines of inquiry and lines of activity. And so I threw my lot in with that and have never regretted it.
What do you mean by communication?
Well, I mean transmitting information to people, using language and other means to create new meanings among people, ways of understanding other people and making yourself known to them. And I think ultimately, I think of communication as something that helps people to act together and sometimes in destructive ways, but ideally in constructive ways, ways that benefit them and benefit others.
What would be the kind of piece, looking back over your career, that you would say this is the idea that was probably the piece that I'm best known for?
Well, the thing that I did for my dissertation was I studied a lower working class neighborhood on the near south side of Chicago. And that doesn't sound, maybe at first glance, as something particularly interesting, but what I learned over 3 to 4 years of working and studying there was a way of communicating that at first I didn't understand as a way of communicating. I just understood and didn't understand what people were saying and doing. But situating myself right in the midst of the lives of people and their children for a couple of years, I came to discover that they were using a different code of how to communicate, why to communicate, how to be social beings in the world. And this eventually turned me from another line of study as a doctoral student to the study of the different ways that people have of communicating, particularly the cultural ways that they have of communicating. And this was so challenging for me to be able to figure this out, how I could live among these people who I came to realize had some very different notions about how we ought to live together. And so that planted the seed that eventually I cultivated in graduate school and developed a way of thinking about and a way of studying and a way of teaching human communication.
And you've come to call that speech codes theory?
Yes. That's in terms of giving a sort of a theoretical account of it. I tried to come up with a theory that would help explain how communication works, given that people, when they communicate, draw from different principles, rules, understandings of the world. And so I came up with the idea of codes, and I could say communication codes, but we're just looking for a shorter word, and speech kind of worked, speech codes theory.
So what does an average person, someone who's not an academic, someone who's not a professor, what does this mean to them? Is that, hey, if I went bowling tonight, that I might be able to understand the words, the terminology that people who bowl use? Is that I mean, how does it help me to understand things?
Yes, it does. I think your example is good, but let me just add something to that, because in the first place where I studied culturally distinctive communication was in the community on the near south side of Chicago. And something I noticed walking through that neighborhood where I worked for about 3 years is that people in that neighborhood had bowling trophies in their windows. And those trophies were facing out, not facing in.
Mm-hmm.
And this was not, to me, the most puzzling thing that I observed there, but it was a puzzling thing. And what I came to learn was that the people in that community, it was a multi-ethnic white community. The late Mayor Daley lived there. Richard I, I call him. His son later became the mayor as well. But Mayor Daley lived his entire life in that community. And what I learned living and working among the people in that neighborhood, community area 60 of Chicago, Bridgeport, is that in many situations I found myself where people were using a different code of communication. And it took me a long time to realize that. And then eventually it began to sink into me. I began to realize that some of the misunderstandings and difficulties and tensions that I was experiencing there were because they had one way of looking at the world and one way of talking about the world, and I had a different one. And for the longest time, I had no clue that that was the case. And then for a long time, it took me quite a while to figure out what some of those differences were. And that's how I got my start in approaching communication as a radically cultural and radically cultured activity and phenomenon, and over the years have worked with many students who have gone to many different countries and worked in many different languages, and we've tried to piece together a way of understanding communication by thinking of it and experiencing it as something that is deeply cultured and deeply shaped by the cultures of the people who produce the communication we experience.
And in your body of work, your approach is you've got to go into those communities and observe it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And I spent about 3 years working in that community. I spent a couple of years pretty much full-time working in what to some people isn't a cultural community, because it's just what many of us experience in our daily lives, an American middle-class kind of community and scenes. And those are the two main cultural codes that I've worked on, although I've worked on some others to a lesser degree. But over the years, my students have I've advised 35 dissertations at the University of Washington, most of which involved a person going out for 1 to 3 years and studying the ways of communicating in some place in the U.S. or across 9 different language varieties in a dozen or so different parts of the world. And then we take all of these studies, mine and theirs, and put them into a pool, as it were, and try to generate knowledge about communication that is sensitive to the variety of ways of communicating that one can find in the complex world.
You've received awards and a tremendous recognition for your teaching and for your mentoring. What's maybe the core attribute of you as a teacher?
Well, that's a good question. Most of the time it's gone extremely well, and I've certainly enjoyed it. I think my core attribute as a teacher is that what I try to do is set out for students at the university level, I set out a question or a problem, and then together we work on that and explore it. In a typical undergraduate class, we would work on this for 10 to 11 weeks. And for example, in the small group communication course that I teach, I'm concerned with the question of how is it possible for a group of, let's just say 7 people to get together and produce something through their communication, a decision, a solution to a problem, a statement, a working policy. How is it possible for them to produce something that is better than what they could have done alone, or better than even if we added all their individual efforts together? How can the communication process work so that they do something that's remarkable, that goes beyond their potential? And I've taught an undergraduate course in this at one university or another for 43, 44 years, and I just never get tired of that. And I just think it's a terribly fascinating question. How can we communicate in a way that can enable us to be more productive than if you just you bore into our individual minds and made a combination of things? What's the synergy factor? And so that's been a very satisfying experience for me over the years to teach that course. And I've done a little bit of research on that. I started out my career to be a researcher of that, but then I got sidelined into this cultural program. But I've always, I think every year I've been a faculty member, which is, this would be my 41st year. 35 at the University of Washington. I think every year I've taught that course at least once.
You had the chance to work with the United Nations as well, right?
Yes.
What's some of the work you've done there?
Well, the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR, several years ago became interested in some questions that really kind of surprised me. If they had to send a team, if the UN had to send a team into a country, let's say Kosovo after a bitter war, or send someplace in after a disaster, would they have a team of people who could say, well, here's how to communicate once the officials come in from Geneva or New York or wherever they might come in from? And I've heard many very high officials in the UN talk about this, that they're in that situation. They have nowhere to turn as to how to figure out the local codes, the local culture, how to communicate in that particular society. And it was surprising to me to hear them say that. And so they got together with some people who were working with some of the theoretical perspectives that I had developed or helped develop. And this went on for some years. And a team of researchers who would work out of Geneva, which is the European headquarters of the UN, started to take some of the ideas that I've worked on and some of my students have worked on as to how to figure out a culture and how to do it relatively rapidly and under difficult circumstances. So they hired and used some of the former students of mine and developed this a methodology for going in and rapidly getting cultural knowledge that would be helpful to people trying to come in under very difficult circumstances and make things work. And so it's been a fascinating line of research. I've been on the edge of it. I go to their meetings, and I went to Ghana with them one year in their maiden trip to try out the methods. And so I've been able to watch this and read about it. And I did the easy work, and they did the hard work.
The easy, hard work of thinking, right? Thinking?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So as you kind of come to a close of your time here at the University of Washington, what's the next great challenge for you?
Well, I guess the next great challenge is to adapt to a different way of life, retirement. Now, I'll be in retirement, which will start I have 4 more days in class, not that I'm counting. But and I'm not eager to quit because I'm really enjoying the work and had a great experience. It's been a wonderful job. But I will be retiring, and I'll keep my hand in. There are several ways in which I'll be doing it, and I'll be doing what I want to do only, although I've been really lucky because at the university I've been able to do so much of what I want to do. I like the teaching and I like the research. But in retirement, I will continue to be interested. And one thing I'm going to do is I do a lot of walking, and I can't help it, just around various cities, including where I live. And I can't help it, but I'm trained, I guess, as an observer of interaction. And so observing the interaction in the course of walking around, this is in urban settings. And so I'm going to have some fun doing that. But I'll also do some typical retirement kinds of things as well. But it's just kind of wired into me now, always to be observing, trying to make sense of what I observe, and to figure things out. So,
your family conversations have to be interesting whenever there's conflicts or disagreements because you have the observatory skills that are going on as well as being a participant at that time, right?
Yes, that's a charitable way of putting it. I think some of the family might say a little bit differently, but it is wonderful, and I do have a wonderful family, wonderful wife, Marie, and 3 wonderful children who have great spouses and children of their own. And growing up or living in a family is a great place to try to test your theories of communication and a very humbling experience. But just to be around people over a long period of time like that, to me, is a very sustaining kind of thing, and it's fun for me to watch the human drama unfold, and I think I'll be doing that a little bit more with some young people from the ages of 4 to 8 soon, grandchildren.
Well, Gerry, it's been great to have you as a colleague. I've been fortunate to be in the same department as you for the last 11 years, and it's really been a privilege of mine. I've learned a lot from working with you, and I've appreciated all you've brought to the department and the university.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all your work here and for the great leadership you've provided as chair during your time sitting in that difficult spot.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Gerry. I wish you the best as you go forward.
Thank you.
I'm David Domke. This has been a chat with the chair of the Department of Communication here at the University of Washington. Had a privilege to talk to Gerry Philipsen today. Thanks for joining us. See you later.